My teacher tried to remove my prosthetic leg in class because she thought I was faking it. I've been using a prosthesis since I was 9, after bone cancer took my real leg. By high school, I was used to explaining it to new teachers, showing my medical documentation, and moving on. Most educators were understanding and supportive, but Mrs. Henderson, our long-term substitute for advanced biology, was different. From day one, she made comments about kids today faking everything for special treatment and stared at me every time I used the elevator or took extra time to switch classes. I tried showing her my 504 plan and medical records, but she just rolled her eyes and muttered something about convenient paperwork. The breaking point came during a lab practical. I was working at my assigned station when she approached with that smug look. She whispered that she'd dealt with attention-seeking students before and that my little act wasn't fooling anyone. I explained again that my prosthesis was real, even offering to show her the attachment point, but she just smirked coldly. "Prove it then," she said, loud enough for nearby students to hear. "If it's real, you won't mind if I check." Before I could react, she grabbed my prosthetic leg and yanked hard, trying to pull it off like it was a costume piece. The pain was excruciating as the socket twisted against my residual limb. I screamed and fell backward, knocking over lab equipment while she kept pulling, convinced it would just pop off. The entire class stopped working. Several students started yelling, not out of outrage, not because they saw the absurd scene that just unfolded, but because they thought I was being dramatic. "He's always exaggerating," I heard someone mutter. "There he goes again, wanting attention," said another. My heart pounded, not just from the physical pain, but because I realized in that exact moment everything I'd been through in recent years, every silent struggle, every scar, every painful step, was being dismissed as theatrical lies. I was still on the floor when Mrs. Henderson let go of my leg with an irritated sigh, as if I were the problem, as if she'd been tricked and was now embarrassed for not proving her conspiracy theory. She leaned down, adjusted her blouse like nothing happened, and with complete calm said, "Can you resume the activity? It was just a misunderstanding." I was trembling inside and out. The pain in the prosthetic socket made me break out in a cold sweat, but it was the rage burning in my throat that kept me from screaming. I stayed there on the floor, surrounded by broken test tubes and indifferent stares. No one came to help. No one extended a hand. With effort, I got up, limping, and left the classroom without a word. I crossed the nearly empty hallway to the nurse's office, where the secretary just looked me up and down and said the nurse was at lunch. I went home that day with the prosthesis misaligned, feeling a stabbing pain that made me stagger, but it was less than the pain of humiliation. I stayed up that night, remembering the hospital, the days when I learned to walk again, the pitying looks in the hallways, the times classmates laughed behind my back because my leg made a metallic click when I stepped. I remembered my mother crying in secret, terrified of what my future would be. And now an adult woman and educator had tried to forcibly remove my leg in front of 30 witnesses, and no one did anything. The next day, I didn't go to school. I spent the entire day gathering everything I had: copies of my 504 plan, medical reports, the orthopedist's letter explaining the prosthetic model and socket type, videos, records, anything that could serve as proof. That same afternoon, my mother came home from work and found me on the couch with a folder full of documents in my lap. I told her everything, every detail. She listened in silence, only fidgeting with her fingers and taking deep breaths with each new piece of information. When I finished, she stood up slowly and said only, "We're going to end this." The next morning, we were in the principal's office. The principal, Mrs. Mitchell, seemed at a loss, flipping through papers, trying to maintain composure as my mother demanded Mrs. Henderson's presence. The principal hesitated. "She's with a class now. Can I call her after class?" "You'll call her now or we go straight to the press with this," my mother replied. The word press had the desired effect. 3 minutes later, Henderson walked into the room as if nothing had happened. She sat across from me and my mother with that same cold stare, arms crossed. "If we're here about that little misunderstanding, you tried to rip my son's leg off in the classroom," my mother said with terrifying calm. "He has injuries to his stump. He'll need to adjust the prosthetic fit and pay a private technician. And on top of that, he was humiliated in front of the entire class." The principal cleared her throat. "Maybe we can find a way to resolve this internally." "It won't be internal," my mother replied. "I've already contacted a lawyer, and I personally sent an email with all the details to the school board, with copies to the Department of Education and 2 local newspapers." Henderson paled. It was the first time I saw her look away. But that was just the beginning. The administration might pretend they wanted to resolve it, but the truth is, public schools live to protect their image. 3 days later, an official statement said the school was investigating the incident and couldn't comment until the internal process concluded. Henderson kept teaching, and the students, well, most of them just thought I'd been too dramatic and now wanted to be on TV, but I was prepared. A friend of my cousin was a journalist for a major student blog. I showed him everything: the photos, the documents, the audio I accidentally recorded the day of the lab. Yes, fortunately, my phone was recording when she said she'd dealt with faking students before. 2 days later, the video was online. Teacher accuses amputee student of faking and tries to remove prosthesis in class. The headline was sensationalist but true. The uproar was immediate. Within hours, the video was on Twitter, Instagram stories, parent groups, and teen YouTube channels. People from all over Brazil sent messages of support, outraged by the story. The school had no choice. Henderson was suspended, then fired. The principal tried to issue a vague statement, saying the school didn't tolerate discriminatory attitudes, but it was too late. The local media covered everything. I was invited to interviews and participated in a discussion about ableism. My Instagram exploded with followers. But what really stuck with me wasn't the temporary fame. It was when a younger kid approached me in the cafeteria and said, "Thanks for not letting it break you. I use an arm prosthesis and was scared to go to PE class. Now I'm going." I smiled for the first time in weeks because, in the end, my scream had been heard. But that was just the first part. The real revenge was yet to come. As much as Henderson's firing was a victory, it wasn't enough for me. The videos, the testimonies, the online uproar, none of it had changed things inside the school. The sidelong glances continued, the whispers in the hallways, and worst of all, some teachers acted like I was the problem. I once overheard the history teacher tell another, "I can't teach peacefully with this cancel culture. Everything's a scandal now." And then I understood they weren't sorry. They were scared, not of me, but of what I represented. A student who dared to fight back, who dared to expose, who refused to accept the role of silent victim. So I decided I wouldn't stop there. In the following months, I dove headfirst into student government, something I'd always thought was a waste of time, I confess. But I realized that within the school's bureaucracy, that's where a lot of dirt hides and also where we can poke the right wounds. I started listening, interviewing classmates with disabilities, with learning disorders, students with ADHD, dyslexia, autism. What had they been through? Who respected them? Which teachers mocked them? Who denied them extra time on exams? What I heard was disgusting. There was a girl with epilepsy whom a physics teacher called possessed. A boy with hearing issues sat at the back of the class because the teacher didn't want to shout. And worst of all, everyone was afraid to complain, afraid of becoming a joke, afraid of being transferred, afraid of becoming me. So I did what I knew how to do. I documented everything. I organized it into files with names, dates, details. I built a support network with parents, alumni, even former employees who sent me messages off the record. When I thought I had enough, I filed a formal complaint against the school for systemic negligence towards students with disabilities. Not just mine, but a collective one, a heavy, evidence-backed complaint. The administration tried to silence me. I was called into a meeting with 2 coordinators and the school psychologist. They said my obsession with justice was affecting the institutional climate. That's when I laughed, a dry, fury-filled laugh. "You're only upset because you can't sweep this under the rug anymore. I'm the dust that came back and stuck to the floor." I walked out of the room with my head held high. Days later, the state prosecutor's office opened an investigation, and things started to crumble. The school became the target of an audit. One by one, the teachers named in the report were questioned. Some took medical leave, others requested transfers. The principal was removed for omission. Suddenly, I wasn't just the kid with the prosthetic leg. I was the name in the newspapers, the student activist, the guy who challenged the system and made the mossy walls of public education shake. Of course, there were consequences. They tried to exclude me from everything. They cut me from the science fair, tried to block my candidacy for class representative. But I'd come too far to back down, and the support outside the school was growing. One Friday afternoon, I received an anonymous Instagram message from a former colleague of Mrs. Henderson. She told me what I did wasn't an isolated case. Years earlier, Henderson had been removed from another school after ridiculing a student in a wheelchair during a presentation. She always got away with a slap on the wrist, but now, finally, someone had exposed her. I saved that screenshot with satisfaction. But there was still an open wound. The students who stayed silent, those who saw her attack me and said nothing, those who laughed, who whispered, who called me a liar. And that's where the bitterest part of this story comes in, because revenge against the structure is one thing, but against people, that's personal. I started with a video, a rant. I recorded it with my phone in my room, unedited, unfiltered. I talked about the pain, the humiliation, the loneliness, but mostly about the collective cowardice that makes monsters like Henderson possible. It wasn't just her, I said. It was everyone who stayed silent while she tried to rip my leg off. It was those who laughed, who whispered, who called me a liar. "You're complicit." The video went more viral than the first. The school tried to control the damage, but it was too late. Students started dividing. Some openly supported me. Others wanted to cancel me for exposing classmates. but those who knew they were wrong stayed silent, and that silence was my greatest triumph because shame is the only kind of justice that sticks to the soul. With each passing day, I gained more strength, more voice, more respect outside the school than within it, and the more I spoke, the more others rose up. It was as if my scar had ignited theirs. At the end of the year, I was invited to speak at a state conference on school inclusion. The packed audience gave me a standing ovation. I looked at the crowd, took a deep breath, and said, "My name is Ko." I lost a leg at 9, but I learned that what really kills you inside is indifference, and that no one will ever take from me again. But I wasn't done yet. The biggest blow was still to come. It was no longer about me. I'd already won, but there were so many others, invisible, silenced, mocked in silence, who didn't have the same voice. And I knew exactly where we could hit hardest, at the root, in the rotten heart of the system. After my conference, I received a message from Ana Luisa, a newly graduated prosecutor who had watched the live stream. She said she was moved by what she heard, was already following the school's case, and wanted to help open a public civil action, not just against the school, but against the Department of Education for historical negligence towards students with disabilities. This wasn't a complaint anymore, it was a bomb. With Ana Luisa and other young activist lawyers, we gathered data from 24 public schools in the state network, cases like mine and worse, students quietly transferred after complaints, teachers who resigned after facing retaliation for trying to include special needs students, schools without basic accessibility. We organized it into a 400-page dossier. The action was filed with the prosecutor's office, backed by NGOs, and a parliamentary front focused on inclusion. The newspapers covered it. The case made national news. The pressure grew so much that the Secretary of Education himself called me. He tried to be kind, political, polite, wanting to schedule a meeting. I agreed but brought a hidden camera. For nearly an hour, he tried to convince me to drop the action, offering partnerships, pilot projects, a position as a youth representative on the state council. I just listened. At the end, I thanked him and said, "Sir, what happened to me could have ended any other student's life. I survived, but now it's the system that needs to survive what's coming." The recording aired that night. The reaction was an earthquake. The secretary was removed due to public pressure. The state government created an emergency commission to reevaluate all inclusion protocols, and a new law began being processed in the Legislative Assembly, inspired by my story, requiring mandatory annual training on ableism and disability rights for all state educators. At the school, everything had changed. New principal, new teachers, a new elevator installed, renovated ramps, braille signage, a dedicated support room for students with special needs, and of course a new look toward me. The kid they ignored became the name of a project, Espaço Ko, Center for Inclusion and Resistance. How ironic life is, relentless. The same people who saw me fall saw me rise. But something was still missing. Henderson. I wanted to know what had happened to her. After a while, a former colleague of hers sent me a small news clipping from a local paper. Henderson had moved to another city, tried teaching again, but was rejected. The article said she'd filed a lawsuit against the state, claiming irreparable moral damages caused by my complaint. She lost the case and was ordered to pay court costs. She now lives far from teaching, caring for her sick mother, unable to step into any public or private classroom. Her name carries a note in the Regional Education Council warning of inappropriate behavior with students. I read that news several times with mixed feelings. On one hand, I felt a pang of pity. She'd sunk herself, lost everything. But on the other, I remembered the pain in my residual limb when she tried to yank off the prosthesis, the dull thud of my fall, the stifled laughter of classmates, the complicit silence of the room. And then I understood, this wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. I didn't destroy her life, she did. I was just the mirror. And now, years later, I look at the scar where a leg once was and see a symbol, not of weakness, but of strength, of resistance, of everything I was forced to endure and everything I refused to become. The story isn't over because there are thousands of Kos out there, kids with invisible scars fighting to be heard. And if my voice can make space for one more, then I'm not done yet, because revenge is just the beginning, justice is the path.